The EU4 that we all know and love today has a pretty simple trade good value system. Notice I said trade good value system, not trade system, as the trade system as a whole, I would argue, well, it actually isn't that bad, but does include things such as, and I'm quoting here, merchant trade propagation in inland trade nodes, on top of overseas trade power impact, statewide trade good size modifier, as well as, of course, everyone's favorite, reduced trade penalty or non-main trade node efficiency. Basically, yeah, it gets complicated, so much so that I'm prepared to wager some of you didn't realize that I made one of those modifiers up. Anyway, the actual value of the trade goods involved inside the trade system is pretty static. Naval supplies are worth 2 ducats. In 1674, you're expected to get the global permanent navies event, so now naval supplies are worth 3 ducats instead of 2, and everyone is happy. Of course, for some trade goods like silks, there's more like 6 price change events, but it's a pretty static, non-dynamic system. You can produce enough furs out of Siberia to give everyone in the world 6 fur coats, and the price of fur won't be affected. And you can also technically go through the entire world and turn every province into gold like a King Midas on a rampage, and then leave one wheat province. But despite that wheat single-handedly supporting 100% of the world's caloric demands, the wheat will still trade at 2.5 ducats, or 2.25 when the Columbian exchange occurs. Indeed, with the announcement of EU5 and the EU5 dynamic trade system, the question is, why is the EU4 trade system not dynamic? Why didn't they add this earlier? Why is there no supply and demand? Well, the honest answer is, there was. Now, before we get into the game, just a quick pit stop to say that a like would be appreciated, and a subscription would be amazing if you haven't already. But enough self-shitting, let's get into the game. Right, hello, here we are. I've loaded back all the way to version 1.4.1. That's not 1.40, some secret 1.37 successor patch, no, 1.4.1 of EU4, the oldest easily accessible patch of EU4. I've recently learned that it is actually technically still possible if you really want to jump through a bunch of hoops to run 1.0. However, not only is it not officially supported by Paradox Interactive, even when you go through the beta versions, before someone tell me, go to the beta versions to find the older versions of EU4, how do you think I got this version? Without the beta codes that they provide on their website, you can only go back to 1.29. Anyway, TLDR, this is the easiest to run old version, and despite technically not being the oldest version of EU4, it contains what I'm technically looking for, namely the dynamic trade goods system. So let's go ahead and get into the game and take a look. Obviously, as we click single player, we're immediately greeted by the wonderful sight of the default terrain map mode, same for Crusader Kings 2, ironically enough. However, if we go back to the political map mode, which is something we're going to be a bit more used to, we'll see the, I would want to say familiar, but not too familiar map of EU4 come into sight. Although there's certainly a lot of changes that some of you will notice and are going to go, wow, that looks awful. I don't know what's going on with Silesia, but they probably want to own the rest of it. And, Nagai is a very sickly color on the map. Anyway, we're going to go through all the innovations of the previous ages by Paradox. So today we're here to look at one very specific thing, namely how trade goods work. So let's click on Vienna. Just because I don't want to click on England, I'm normally always playing England. I mean, never playing England. So I want to make sure we do something different today. So how does trade goods work in something like Vienna? Well, you can see the manufacturing icon where you can construct a manufactory. So these are cool, and they give you the actual, they give you a bonus to the production of the province. So one of the few ways you can affect supply is building these manufactories. Farm estates being built on grain provinces, textile and woolen cloth, and you can kind of also see the reduced list of available trade goods. I mean, there's no glass, for example. There's no gemstones. But of course, outside of this manufacturing menu, there's also the building menu, which is where you can technically get some buildings to get a bit of self-scaling, like the Treasury building unlocked at Admin 14, which gives you 10% goods produced, as well as some local tax modifier. One of the things I guess, and I hope is not the case, I didn't have time to test this, is I hope this is not global 10% goods produced, because that would be slightly broken. Anyway, since, as you can see, we don't have a development of production or manpower even, we just have a base tax value, the production income of the province is pretty much entirely dependent on the trade value of the trade good, and then manufacturers give you plus 100% goods produced on it. So, how does something like wine here work? Well, when we click on said wine, we can see it has a base price, and actually every single trade good in the game has a base price. Naval supply still has a base price of 2. But the base price of the trade good is then affected by the supply and demand of the trade good. Provinces in the game generate supply of a trade good, like wine. Provinces grow grapes and turn into wine, so far so good on that front. And the amount of their production multiplied by modifiers affects the total amount of quote-unquote supply in the market. You then get demand of this trade good in question. So, let's take a look at the wine demand. If we've passed the Liquor Act, we decrease the wine demand by 25%. If we're Muslim, we decrease it by 99%. If we loot the province, they're probably not in the mood for drinking alcohol. If we are not controlled by its owner, so someone else occupies it, then I guess we're a bit busy being occupied to drink wine. If we're at war, we for some reason half our wine consumption. Maybe I kind of disagree with that, but I feel like if I'm at war, I'll probably drink more. But if we're pretty stable, like our stability is at least 3, our demand goes up. And this stability demand actually applies to most trade goods. If we take a look at something like even naval supplies here, as you can see, despite having a lot more of a dynamic system, the stability still negatively affects and increases demand on a more global scale. So a big country being stable increases the demand of a trade good. Naval supplies, however, is a more interesting one. As you may have noticed by this big graph, if the province owner contains fleets, has a lot of heavy ships or light ships, they're going to create increased demand for naval supplies out of all of their provinces, which is cool. It also means that technically can crash the market of naval supplies by going ahead and basically conquering the world and not having either any ports, which is a bit hard, I guess, to do, but more specifically by deleting all your navies, because you're going to decrease the province owner supply push that's created for naval supplies. So yeah, it's not the best system, of course. It's still kind of a weird case of base price and pivots of supplies and demand, but it's there, it's in the game. Well, there's a surprising list of ways you can affect it. As I mentioned before, you can increase production by things like local goods produced. But for more exotic trade goods, let's for example consider, we might want to zoom out of this, and actually, Observer did work. That's neat. If we go into Observer, we can go ahead and take a look at something like spices here, or tea. So the tea demand, if the province has a customs house built, is going to double the demand for tea, which is neat. So you can basically increase demand for a trade good like tea by building tea. Cool. Oh, sorry, not building tea, building customs houses. Same for spices. So certain buildings will affect demands for certain trade goods, and that's very neat. You can kind of induce demand, as it were. And yeah, the building system ironically got simplified, if anything. There's a lot more building icons that are just unused now. Like, for example, the armory is just an unused asset nowadays. As is the spy agency, which is interesting. Local spy defense and local defensiveness is weird. I guess it's a bit unusual to see that way. And forts are very weird, because forts also have percentage fort levels. Like, you can go fort level 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 7 and 9. Yeah, it's a bit whack. And there's also the case of like really unique buildings. You can build a glorious monument for yearly prestige, but you can only have the one. And yeah, I mean, hey, there's marketplaces still that give you local trade power flat, not as percentages. And then you do get local trade value from things like canals, which you can build in the middle of the country, but still a bit cool. And again, the unique buildings are very nice, like building a tax assessment, which gives you yearly inflation reduction. Neat. As well as universities, which are, weirdly enough, a unique building. You're only allowed one university in the entire country, but I guess it gives you tech costs. It's a pretty good idea. You're not allowed to spam them. And hey, you can even build a fine arts academy in Vienna. Although, now that I've said it, maybe I shouldn't have selected Austria as a demonstration point. Maybe I should demonstrate more things in England. I feel like a fine arts academy being built in Vienna is just setting the scene for something to happen later. Anyway, moving swiftly on. There's a trade goods system. It's dynamic demand. If you conquer the entire world as a Muslim nation, you're going to demolish the global demand for wine, which makes sense. And one of the things that I actually find really cool, and I had to go Burgundy for this one, is, for example, things like salt. As you can see, the demand for salt is increased, for example, by either, okay, if the province owner has a salt crisis, makes sense. But also, if the province has, well, the production of fish, if a province produces fish, it's going to want to have more salt come into it, because there's going to be salting the fish. So it's like an induced demand based off the trade goods themselves. More fish producing provinces are going to be demanding more salt to salt the fish. It's cool. If you're doing an MP game like this, for example, where there's grain, there's going to be induced demand to the grain, because everyone's going to be building armories and training fields and barracks and regimental centers to, build up their army, which is going to give a much higher demand price for grain than you would have in a normal game. And that's cool, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's still, bear in mind, of course, on the old innovative trade system of EU4. And Jesus Christ, these trade nodes are big. And also somewhat broken. Okay, there we go. I was going to say I can't really see some of the icons there. But these trade nodes are massive and also very whack. Like, Krakow looks massive, but if you actually look at the amount of provinces involved, it's not that big of a trade node. And so on and so forth. It's an interesting system and it's definitely shown its age. So bear in mind that this is also happening on top of a old trade flow system. Also, England not being an English channel endnode, that's cursed. It's going out to Antwerpen. So yeah, it makes sense for England to invade the Netherlands. They're actually the ultimate endnode. They truly are. I mean, Genoa actually flows into Antwerp here. And I guess Venice is also kind of an end node as well, so that's neat to see. And Tunis node includes a bit of Italy. I mean, the real most cursed thing that I actually observed in the entire trade node setup when I was looking around earlier actually happens in Korea, because you can see the North and South Korea separation based on the Nippon and Beijing trade node. And the Beijing trade node is cursed, because what is this? This is like the opposite of Beijing. You're naming a trade node the size of this, which is basically modern-day Girin, based on a province like here. Also coastal Beijing, and which produces spices. It's really cursed. Anyway, weird trade nodes aside, look, Northern Australia is entirely uninhabitable. The question we have to ask ourselves is, well, why isn't this system used still today? Like, this would be pretty cool, right? And, I mean, it would be. But let's also realize another thing. This system updates. Now, I'm actually going to do a very quick tactical reload, because I know that this version of Observer, which is added in around these patches, is very buggy. And I was about to unpause while I'm in Observer, but that's actually a really terrible idea. Let me reload the game and select Observer immediately. Okay, we're back into EU4, the loading screen. Let's click on single player here, and we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to select Observer mode as our default setting. So now we're going to go load into the game into Observer mode. And this lets us actually use Observer mode without immediately crashing. It is, however, version 1.4 of Observer mode, a very old Observer mode, so not only do we start with our capital in the void, which is why we've scoped to the 00 of the map, we also are informed that we are unable to, well, hire any mercenaries, because the Observer mode nation has no mercenaries, and of course we have a free military leader, and we can go select missions. Yep, because we are not playing Observer mode, we're not playing Ghosted, we are playing an Observer tag, quote-unquote. Which means we, for example, have currently no government. We have a no government, no ruler guy who's been inaugurated on the 1st of January, 1461. So the ruler of our nation is going to, No, I apologize. The ruler in charge of our nation is 1,461 years old, because he was inaugurated on the 1st of January on the 1st. So that's interesting. We have no culture, and we also will have no religion, of course. So that's neat. I would love to click this button, the ideas button, because I would like to see what the no ideas look like, but I've actually realized earlier when I was testing this that pressing this button causes the game to crash, so I'm not going to press that button and not crash my game. But if we look at our missions decisions, we can actually do some missions and decisions. Neat. Anyway, none of this actually matters, just wanted to show how janky old Paradox titles were, well, when it comes to some of their features like Observer mode. If we go back to here, we can actually unpause without a crash now that we've selected Observer by default. So let's knock the speed up and take a look at what happens to the price of wine on a day-to-day basis. Pressing the unpause button unfortunately did crash my EU4 instance, so that's a bit awkward. Let me quickly fix that, I'll be back shortly. Anyway, sorry, third time's the charm. Let's make sure we select Observer. We're going to go ahead and actually observe the game, and hopefully not encounter a crash when we unpause. We're back to the void. I think probably me hovering over this menu is just a bad idea, so let's just not do that. Let's not even hover over ideas. And let's set the speed up to 3, something reasonable. And it's fine. Okay, we're actually fine. All is good. All is well. Thank you very much. There we go. Yeah, this is obviously a very buggy state of the Observer mode. It was pretty much just added on this patch or near to it, so that's to be expected. The main reason we're going to be, well, talking about this and want to demonstrate here is this supply and demand, and hence current price of the trade good is dynamic and updating rather quickly. Not that much, not actually too much goes into changing this, especially something like wine. There's not that many factors that change wine prices. As you can see, the entire global changes in supply and demand decrease the current prices of wine from 3.32 to 3.28 by the time we click between them. But, as you imagine, every time this is happening on the month ticks, here's the 3.3 now. This is not good for performance. In fact, this was actually really awful for performance. This was abysmal for performance. And I want to be relatively clear here, because when it comes to performance issues, we have to address them from the fact that I'm currently running this game on, well, I won't say 2025 hardware, but it's running on a computer that runs 2025 things. But this is a patch that was released in 2014, 11 years ago, and it was released for 2014 hardware. And 2014 hardware is going to struggle with a monthly updating, well, trade good price a lot more. Basically, while it wasn't actually the end of the world for performance and the game still ran, it was a major performance issue. And another thing to have to bear in mind is that it's going to still run relatively well today, because look at the province counts and army counts we're dealing with. Yes, there's a lot of well, soldiers, but there's a lot less provinces and a lot less nations that are doing all these calculations. As the EU4 expanded in scope and added, frankly, even more trade goods into the game, as that was happening, the complications involved with maintaining this kind of stuff got a lot worse. Now, this is my current best assumption. I can only assume logically that having a currently updating trade good value would be bad for performance. Is that the main reason they got rid of it? Because at the end of the day, that's only what I'd heard. Rumors reached me that, they got rid of this because of the performance issues. And I was going to report initially and just say, yeah, it was the performance issues that got rid of this system. But I realized, I can just ask Johan. So I did. I reached out to Johan and said, hey, Johan, is it true that they got rid of the dynamic trade good pricing because of performance? And Johan responded and said, yes. So, yeah, there you go. They got rid of it because of performance. I guess it shouldn't come as too much of a big surprise to anyone, but my honest answer is that if you reduce the map to such a significant extent as, I guess, 2014 EU4 was, and let it rip at speed 5, it doesn't do badly. We kind of traded the performance of the increased cost, shall we say, performance-wise, of these trade goods into the fact that we have a lot more provinces and a lot more detail on all of the nations that we're playing, Are these fair exchanges? Well, that's kind of for you to judge, but I genuinely believe a dynamic-ish trade good system could still probably work and could even be to some extent modded back in. But the question is that do you even want it to be modded back in? Wow, that's something I probably shouldn't hover over. And yeah, I mean, it's not running badly. It's running fine. In fact, this is probably a bit better than Speed 5 I'd get in the current version of the game. But that's the inherent truth. This was one of the things that was optimized out. I think the game's much worse with dynamic trade good pricing gone. I think it would have been really cool, but it's certainly not the end of the world. But with all that said, that is going to be all the time I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed today's video, or at least learned something new today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Soda, W Haste, Solemon, Sal72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nekus, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grabmore Flavia, Conno, Andrew Zalberg, Deki, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, Zerkis, Mr. Goomshock, Yukata, Danray, Arthur Tan, Jack, and Mildy.